Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War news update, second and third part thereof. This is a live stream, obviously, as you guys are here with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is because I'm running a little bit behind due to, normal life things and whatnots, and having a very nice morning and early afternoon out with the whānau, with the family, doing family things. And now it's time to get back to concentrating on our impending doom in World War III, of course. Just a gentle reminder, if anyone lives near North Hampshire, south of the UK and whatnot, I am giving a talk in the Andover area on the 15th of June. I think the email to that is in the description below, and that doesn't go to. It's not an email to me. I don't vet them. It's just to make sure that you're not the FSB, I guess. Yeah, anyway, be great to see you all. I know there's a bunch of you coming, and so it's going to be weird to see you face to face. I hope I don't disappoint. What I hope is to get some decent conversation going to make it interactive in the kind of Q&A part, and then, then I'm sure the pints will flow and the conversation will follow suit. Right. Okay. So let's get to the talking to you guys about newsy stuff. I have to remind you that I'm on my own here. There is no one else with me. In fact, I would have asked JR to have helped to vet questions and whatnot in the live chat, but he is without internet at the moment, and that is enough to make a grown man cry. I've spent many an hour in the corner just crying, having to do all the mapping as well. Interestingly, not a lot of change to the mapping. Thankfully, I mean, it's quite a task. JR is an absolute legend for doing that. He honestly is. But as I keep saying, not much change is really good news for Ukraine. I think the Russians are struggling to be able to accumulate enough forces to do really devastating offensives to the and try and break through the Ukrainian front lines. And I think they made a mistake by attacking at Kharkiv, and I'm not sure that this summer is going to be much of a success for the Russian armed forces as it might have been, although they could be accumulating troops and equipment, and we just don't know. And that could be a reason why the Ukrainians are not seeing an awful lot of attacks involving massive amounts of mechanized equipment. The Russians could be stockpiling that somewhere. I don't know. I think it's somewhat unlikely, but you never know. Anyway, let's get to the newsy stuff. So pressing the right button, I'm going to move myself over to another screen. Goodness me, I don't think I could cope without a second screen. Right, we are going to start with, in fact, let's make that a little bit bigger for you. I think that's better. Okay, I must remember I'm at the bottom left these days, not the bottom right. Germany is considering sending a fourth Patriot system to Ukraine. This would come on top of the 3 that Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government has pledged already. So this is on top of the further Patriot that they have pledged in their IAAD initiative, the initiative for air defense that is, it was aimed at bringing other European and allied nations together, or any allied nations together, to help Ukraine in a really expedited fashion to get air defense equipment to them. And actually, although people have committed to giving quite a bit of money and some radars and other bits and pieces and missiles, no one came up with the goods for significant air defense systems apart from Germany. So Germany pledged a third Patriot. They've already pledged 2. They've pledged more Patriots in the US, and the US has a lot more Patriots, although they arguably have greater need for them. But Germany are now pledging a 4th one. This is exceptionally good news if indeed it does pan out. Germany really are doing a fantastic job. And, as someone says, as Fifi Barbara says, woo Deutschland. I mean, we can often get sidelined with the whole Taurus issue and the fact that Olaf Scholz he's not really big on doing things that are seen as escalatory, but giving things that they've already given can't really be seen as escalatory. And once that boundary has been pushed, often with following along on what the US has done. So with the main battle tanks, the US had to give the Abrams first, even though UK had given the Challenger 2s. US gave the Abrams that allowed Olaf Scholz to say, okay, we're going to give the Leopards. And then you had air defense systems. Germany end up giving, I think, who was first? I don't know whether, I presume the US was first in giving a Patriot, but nonetheless, Germany is now possibly going to have given 4 Patriots, which is fantastic. And, you know, it is really impressive. I don't know whether this is Boris Pistorius, who's a defense minister, who is very pro-Ukraine. I think Olaf Scholz is pro-Ukraine, but he's just very cautious, and that style of leadership that isn't, I think, I guess if you compare him presently to Emmanuel Macron, you get quite different leaders. Emmanuel Macron's like, yeah, let's send some troops into Ukraine. Yes, screw you, Russia, but also screw you, the US. He's doing things that doesn't fit too well, Emmanuel Macron, that is, with, say, Jake Sullivan and others in the Biden administration. Anyway, too much chit chat. Come on, get on with it, Piers. According to a report by Bloomberg, which cites people familiar with the matter, Germany is considering providing Ukraine with a 4th Patriot battery. The German government has currently delivered 2 and promised a 3rd one, which will likely be delivered this month. That 3rd one, that's fantastic. So German aid to Ukraine here saying, I could well imagine why we would commit to a 4th battery. So far, no other country in the world wants to spare one of the valuable air defense systems, but Ukraine says it needs at least 7 additional ones to protect major cities and critical infrastructure. A simpler and cheaper option would, of course, be to support the initiative from the Netherlands, which only requires certain parts donated from various countries so that a full battery can be created in the end. It's a really good idea. So, but whole batteries are made up of lots of different components, the radar system, command and control, the launchers, number of launchers. So you can give, say, an element of one of your batteries that doesn't completely degrade your air defense capabilities. Maybe you've got several batteries and the radar could cover like 2 batteries worth, or you could use other radar pieces of equipment that can plug into that, or you give one of your launchers, but you have more launchers to spare. So together you can accumulate enough equipment for a whole battery. If we commit to a 4th battery and do not participate in the Dutch initiative, this also means that there is no longer a need within the initiative, and a Patriot battery has already been assembled. This would mean that Ukraine gets at least 3 out of the 7 they have asked for. If we really do hand over another battery, I'm curious to see whether we will be paid for it with the money collected from the German IAAD initiative. Around 660 million euros have been collected, which should be enough for a battery and a few missiles. If I remember correctly, is it not something like 400 odd million out of the billion for a Patriot system is for the missiles? So the missiles take up a huge 40% of the overall cost, something like that. I can't remember for sure. So anyway, good news from the Germans there. If you have questions, good luck with that. I'll try and see things that end in question marks and leave them for the end. Someone is mentioning Kiesewetter. So here's even Kiesewetter, so that's a German opposition politician from the German opposition, has given an interesting interview about getting serious with supporting. That's not something I've seen. It'd be fantastic to get a handle on that, so I'll have to look into that one. Thanks for giving me the heads up. Right, the US has proposed, as I've mentioned before, $225 million package. They are, or pledged, I've talked about this before, but just to give you a more complete list of the stuff they're giving: missiles for the Hawk air defense system. These are old school air defense systems, big old missiles on the Hawks. They're good for shooting down cruise missiles. They're not going to take down your ballistic, your top dollar missiles from the Russians, but really useful. And there's quite a number of these systems around the world now, fairly obsolete, although arguably not obsolete. They are still taking down Russian cruise missiles, so they appear to be able to do a job. Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, so they will be for both the man-pad, shoulder-launched man-portable systems, and also for the ones on the back of, say, the Avenger Humvees with 2 pods of 4 each side there. They use Stinger missiles, so on and so forth. ammunition for HIMARS. They obviously need lots of that. And they've already had lots of that. There were comments recently that they've got more HIMARS ammunition than they've ever had before. 155mm howitzers, not the ammunition, but the howitzers. That's great because there has been attrition of M777 howitzers and generally other howitzers. That's going to be really useful for the Ukrainians. And I'm sure, I don't know actually, I need to look into that. How many, in fact, someone I'm sure can Google how many, that's a bit of homework for you right now, guys. How many M777s have the Americans got in, say, in storage or in stocks in general, active or not? Then 80, so we've got artillery rounds, both for tanks and artillery. We've got 81mm mortar rounds. That's super important. M113 armored personnel carriers. Fantastic. These are kind of workhorses in the Ukrainian army at the moment. They aren't the sort of vehicles you want to be sending onto the front lines. They're not hugely modern at all. They are better for just carrying people around, doing medevacs, stuff like that. We have seen them actually get both in the medevac and also generally dropping troops off around the contact line. So they are being used. And actually, we've seen the Dutch version, the YPR 765, a slightly upgraded version to that be used as well. We've got news that the Italians are giving some of their own ones too. We'll come to that later. Trailers for heavy transport of heavy equipment, coastal and riverine patrol boats. Good, because there's a lot of attrition in those boats. Tube launch optically tracked, wire guided, so the tow missiles. They are for the top of the Bradleys, and they obviously, well, they seem to get through a lot of these because these are always on the list, but I don't see that many of the. I have seen some footage of bits of kit being taken out by tow missiles, but not that many. So I don't know. I wonder if they get used with any other system, whether there's any other kind of ATGM system that can use. I doubt it. But they do get given a lot of them. Javelin and AT anti-armor systems, those anti-tank guided missiles, as I say, from held from the shoulder, those ones. Small arms ammunition, grenades, demolition munitions, night vision devices, spare parts maintenance, and other ancillary equipment. All very good stuff there. Thank you. I knew you could trust you guys. So Darren Merritt says 1,250 M777s as of January 2024 in the US, Canada, and Ukraine, according to British Aerospace Engineering Systems. So that's although that, thank you for that, and that is a number there. I don't know how many the US need. What is their kind of ideal number? How many are required for active kind of duty or whatever, and how many are sitting around gathering dust? But they certainly need as many as those as they can get. Right, so the US State Department has approved a possible foreign military sale to Denmark of 84 AIM-120C8 AMRAAMs. So these are air-to-air missiles, plus associated equipment and services for an estimated cost of $215 million. The prime contractor would be Raytheon. What's interesting is, obviously what these are going to be used for. One assumes that we have some missiles being ordered by the Danish. The Danish are involved in the training of Ukrainian pilots on the F-16, and these could be ahead of, missiles. This could be for loading F-16s. It could be after many have been used up or whatever. The question is, what munitions are they going to have on the F-16? We don't really know what the loadout will be, but fingers crossed they have some decent munitions, and there will need to be forward planning in terms of having this continued flow of munitions to Ukraine as they get used up. Right, the Netherlands is to invest $436 million to make armored vehicles for Ukraine. This is really good. I'm just going to go back to something you guys have said, because general consensus says US doctrine depends mostly on HIMARS. I was going to talk about this. I didn't want to derail myself too much. I've talked many times before that HIMARS was, I think, initially seen as a replacement to barrel artillery, particularly towed artillery. Okay, we won't need that. We'll use these these really mobile systems that can drive around, shoot and scoot, and are far more precise. But actually, this war has shown that there is still a need, arguably, for artillery and even towed artillery. So US doctrine depends mostly on HIMARS and air power and self-propelled artillery. Maybe this has changed some in 3 years, but M777 seems obsolete for peer-to-peer conflict. Yeah, and that was how I understood it. The question is whether this war's changed things. So I did see, was it a Perun video talking about how they may be like rethinking stuff, and there is a need for towed artillery. Towed artillery is useful because it's actually quite transportable. It's lighter than, say, self-propelled gun, HIMARS, bit of kit, so you can heli lift these. You can whack a bunch of them in the back of a Hercules or the American equivalent, and fly them off to X, Y, and Z. So they're quite useful for things like, paratroopers, Marines, or whatever. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how many the US have to spare. Okay, but anyway, back to the Dutch. The Dutch will invest 400 million euros, $436 million, into a Swedish fund to produce infantry fighting vehicles for Ukraine. Dutch media reported on June the 7th. The report did not specify the type of infantry fighting vehicle, but Ukraine and Sweden last year signed an agreement to start jointly producing CV90, considered one of the best of its type in the world. So the CV90 is, I think, produced by BA Systems, by the Swedish, and they have provided some already to Ukraine. A couple have been lost, but they're thought to be, really the best infantry fighting vehicles in the world at the moment. That's great news. If the Dutch are going to fund Ukraine and Sweden building them in Ukraine, that's just a really good combination. Thank you to all those nations. And not only that, but the Netherlands is. See, this is the next one about the Dutch. So just further to what was just mentioned, because numbers are obviously going to be important to think about. So the Netherlands is contributing all that money for the procurement of the CV90-35 Mark III for Ukraine, together with Sweden and Denmark. While the article does not state that 180 does state that 180 of the 230 units are to be built in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it remains unclear if this 230 total includes the 50 replacement vehicles that Sweden ordered or not. So different claims about the numbers there. So actually because it does mention being built in the Netherlands. So again, that's going to be part of a bit of an industrial strategy from the Dutch, which is, okay, we're going to pay a bunch of money, but we want to secure some jobs with that money. So it'll help both Ukraine and the Dutch economy. So the Netherlands has pledged another $60 million towards military drone production. The Dutch say it will help Ukraine. Defense Minister Christophe van der Maat says it will finance production sites and support research into drones. We want to help Ukraine and help build up our own army. And again, this goes back to being part of your own industrial strategy, as well as your own military strategy, which is to say, the money to Ukraine so often is effectively, if you look at it as you zoom back out, it's like you are paying to upgrade your own army, to give yourself the best possible kit by either giving Ukraine, so presidential drawdown authority in the US draws down on existing stocks, gives them to the US, and then through all that same kind of funding, you are replacing that stuff that you've given away with new stuff. Not all the time. It depends whether you actually need to replace that. I did that long discussion using Colby Badwar's thread about how PDA and USAI work. So PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority, taking your own stocks. USAI, which is orders for Ukraine that go directly to the manufacturers, and then you get replenishment funding. But it doesn't have to be one-to-one. So if you give, say, M777 is a really good example. So if you've got a whole bunch of M777s, you say, we're going to give 100 M777s to Ukraine. And they say, we value them at X. They've got a book value of this. But the reality is they don't have there's no cost of you giving that, apart from transport costs. There's no cost of you giving the artillery to Ukraine. The costs come in the opportunity cost. So it could be that those 100 M777s might have been able to have been sold to another country. But quite often you actually disassemble them and recycle them or whatever, in which case it actually costs you to do that, so you're saving a cost. But sometimes the opportunity cost might be not being able to sell them to another country because you are giving them to Ukraine. Okay, but essentially it's not costing you, it's not money coming out of your bank. And yet, say, and I'm going to make this number up, but say 100 M777s is like $10 million, and you're like, there's $10 million that we've given to Ukraine. And so the thing is, you tell the American public that you've just given $10 million worth of kit to Ukraine, or you've given $10 million package to Ukraine, but actually it's not a cost at all. It's like, here's a bunch of M777s will be sitting there for 20 years, and we're just going to give them to Ukraine. And no one's losing, no one's having money extracted from their bank accounts. But then you get funding as part of the Ukraine package. So that $61 billion isn't $61 billion that's going to go to Ukraine. This is a bunch of money that gets given in value of equipment that goes in PDA to Ukraine, and then that's kind of knocked off the $60 billion. And then some more funding taken from another little bucket within that overall package is for replenishment, but you don't have to replenish one for one. So it depends what, and this goes back to what general consensus was saying, it depends what your doctrine is. If the doctrine is we don't need M777s anymore because we're replacing them with HIMARS, and actually we have as a result, we've got 1,000 M777 sitting doing nothing, then we don't have to replace the 100 M777s with another 100 M777s. We don't even need to replace them necessarily with any HIMARS. It could be that actually we're strategically in the right place for the amount of HIMARS we have, and so that could just be PDA. But if you are going to replenish, it might be okay. We'll replenish that. We'll replace those 100 M777s with 5 HIMARS, and then that comes out. That the buying of those 5 HIMARS comes out of your Ukraine funding, and then what the Ukraine funding is therefore doing is getting rid of obsolete equipment and upgrading it to new equipment. So in the end, you have 5 new HIMARS. Ukraine has the capability to beat an enemy, which is kind of paying dividends in terms of your geopolitical strategies. And this money isn't a case of taking money out of hospitals for the US and giving it to Zelensky to spend on super yachts. That's obviously nonsense. It's far more complicated than that, and it's far more beneficial for these countries involved. So this is going back to both the Dutch funding for infantry fighting vehicles, though those are jobs going to the Netherlands, and then it's funding for drones here. And not only might that well be jobs going to the Netherlands as well, but also R&D done with the Ukrainians that gives you a knowledge base in your country that is to the military benefit of your country. So we're going to get together with the Ukrainians. We're going to help them to develop the very best drones that we can for use on their battlefields. But with that comes an increase in our knowledge of what is needed in modern battlefields that we wouldn't get if we weren't working closely with the Ukrainians. So again, that $60 million is actually an investment in the Netherlands' defense capabilities. We got to see, we need to understand this, because we are going to be having to sell, or countries are going to have to sell this to their publics, and they need to know how to do that much more effectively than I think they already are. I know I've said this a million times, but I do have to repeat myself, obviously, for newbies, and because we forget things, don't we? Right. Macron and Zelensky signed agreements on financing critical infrastructure of Ukraine. France will allocate 200 million euros to companies that will invest in the recovery and critical infrastructure, and 60 million euros from this fund to the energy sector. And even with these, if I was to be perfectly cynical, I'm sure that there'll be many French companies that are benefiting from this allocation of money that will get the contracts to help out Ukraine here. So again, it's about being an economic stimulus for your own country. It's just not. Sometimes it is cash to Ukraine, and sometimes Ukraine just needs a shed load of cash to keep its country operational. I would imagine a lot of that's going to come from things like the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and other big banking organizations. There'll be strings attached to a lot of money that comes into Ukraine, and there will be grants that are given different countries to Ukraine as well. So it's not to say there's never any money that goes, but again, I assume that often there will be strings attached, and those strings will be beneficial to the countries giving the money. Right, France, says Sophie Bennett, is really stepping up its aid to Ukraine. After talks with Zelensky in Paris, Macron says France will go ahead with supplies of the Mirage 2000-5. Pilot training is to start in France immediately. That's really, really good. Just sorry, popping into live chat. Everything donated to Ukraine is a benefit to the givers and to the free world. Give more. Absolutely. You know, you get that whole benefit of Ukraine prevailing, and that's the benefit to us all, but also in all the ways that I've been mentioning already. Anyway, sorry to interrupt myself. So, Stephen interrupted me. Come on, Stephen, stop interrupting me. France will go ahead and supply with the supply of Mirage 2005 and the pilot training to start immediately in France is really good news. So there's been talk about the planes getting to Ukraine by the end of the year. That's really good. We will train and equip a brigade of Ukrainian soldiers in France. So someone was telling me the other day, that this has been overlooked a little bit as being a really significant thing. So that's not just the training of an awful lot of people, whole brigade, 4,500 troops, but it's also the equipping of them with all the stuff that they will need. And I don't know, there was kind of talk about it there being other people, maybe support people around that, getting training or provision. I don't know. But and then France is to assemble a coalition to train inside Ukraine. That is incredibly significant. It is a change of direction for the EU. This is really, really good news. And it's not just France, right? They're going to be sending instructors to Ukraine. There appears to be a coalition forming, or probably already formed. We often hear about these things after the fact. Now, sticking with France, Macron says that there will be new deliveries of Scalp EG missiles and AASM Hammer bombs to the Air Force of Ukraine, and they've already been made and will continue. This is brilliant news. Now, unfortunately, with Max 24, he doesn't put the source here, and I haven't had time to look into this. I would really like the source of that. But there's been a lot of worry that actually there isn't a ramped up production or any production of new Scalp EG or Storm Shadow cruise missiles. And I don't know if this entails that. I've not seen anything, so I doubt it. But there appears to be this desire to continue to provide Ukraine with Scalp EGs. And that is huge. And also the Hammer guided glide bombs are really useful. They are less susceptible to jamming than, say, the JDAMs, as far as I am aware, which makes them very, very useful. And Ukrainians are using them a lot. At present, they have 50 a month for 12 months, giving 600 in total. That is really good, but actually they could do with more. And we are hearing that F-16s are going to be adapted to fire those or drop those, which is doubly brilliant, and it means that there's a greater number of aircraft that can release these bombs. So I would suggest ramping up production of those big time. And ever with this, this is marketing for the Hammer bomb, right? For the manufacturer of the Hammer, you are getting really good advertising here. And to say that it can be made compatible with existing F-16 stocks, then that's even better, right? So the Ukrainians need to wrest back advantage in the air. They seem to be doing this a little bit with the degradation of the Russian air defenses, especially with the introduction of HIMARS and the ability to strike over the border in the north of Ukraine. That's really, really good. That means that I think the Russian aircraft are a little bit more cautious about where they fly, and we have seen a drop, apparently a 50% drop of the Russians in their sorties and dropping their carb bombs. Now, when we say, right, France at the moment are giving 50 a month for 12 months, that is a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to how many carb bombs the Russians are manufacturing and dropping. And so I think a big uptick in this kind of munition production would be really useful for the Ukrainians. Tea break. Why, thank you. And we move on. We are staying with France. KNDS France, it's a French manufacturer, Urenco and 7 other EU manufacturers will share a budget of 1.618 billion euros. That's a lot of money, provided by 7 countries for the supply of complete shots and elements of 155mm shells. So we're still in this period of Ukraine needing an absolute ton of artillery ammunition, particularly 155mm shells. The aim of this 2-year mechanism is to speed up the replenishment of national stocks by pooling requirements and achieving economies of scale, but also, if the recipient country so decides to continue military assistance to Ukraine, it focuses on ammunition compatible with 4 European-made systems that are also in service with the Ukrainian army. The German Panzerhaubitze 2000, the Polish Krab, AHS Krab that's co-made with South Korea, the Slovakian Suzana, and the French Caesar, all self-propelled artillery systems. There's your Panzerhaubitze 2000. There's I don't know, maybe another Panzerhaubitze 2000. That's a Suzana, I think. And there's no Caesar there. But anyway, you've seen plenty of them before. Right, KNDS Italy, a subsidiary, and Rheinmetall will share the bulk of the envelope. Both were selected for the €1 billion lot for the production of complete shots for the Panzerhaubitze 2000. KNDS France won a €100 million contract for the supply of complete shots for the Caesar. KNDS France will also supply modular charges and walled high explosive shells, some of which will be equipped with a base bleed. So base bleed, if I remember correctly, you get a bit of sort of gas coming out that gives it a bit of propulsion in the air and gives you further range. Device to increase the range. In addition, 2 contracts worth €15 million have been awarded to KNDS Italy for the supply of modular charges. Urenco will produce modular charges for a total of 15 million. So this is really good news. There seems to be a lot of mobilization, if you like, of the industrial sector in Europe to really ramp up production. Yeah, you might say, why didn't this happen a year ago? Okay, yeah, but it's happening now. This is really good. LKNDS France will manufacture high explosive extended range shells and percussion fuses for the Panzerhaubitze 2000, and vice versa. Rheinmetall is being commissioned for shells, fuses, and primer ignitions for the Caesar. The 9 manufacturers selected are those listed on the screen. Really good news there. Okay, talking about France again. France begins training Ukrainian pilots and mechanics literally in the next few days, says Macron. Also, the French president refused to name the number of Mirage 2005 aircraft that will be transferred to the defense forces so as not to play along with the enemy. Quote, I will not give you the details or the exact number. The priority is to start training pilots and mechanics. There is something that will be launched literally in the coming days in France. It will take both place on our territory, Macron said. And he certainly didn't say it like that. That is to give a bit of parity there, because I do bad Australian accents. So it's about time I do a bad French accent. Et voilà. Merci bien. Right, let's have a thread on the F-16 fighter jets, because they are in the news and there's a lot of conversation about what these airframes, these aircraft entails. Right, F-16 thread and Mirage 2000-5 thread. Sorry, Mirage is what I was talking about more than the F-16. The introduction of the F-16 and Mirage 2005 fighter jets into Ukraine's air force could significantly enhance its defensive and offensive capabilities in the conflict with Russia. I hope you don't mind me doing a bit of a thread here. Both the F-16 and Mirage are advanced multi-role fighters capable of establishing air superiority. Their advanced radar systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and agility can help Ukraine challenge Russian air dominance. These jets can conduct precision strikes using advanced munitions against Russian ground forces, logistics, and infrastructure. Their ability to deliver guided bombs and air-to-ground missiles accurately can weaken Russian operational effectiveness. These aircraft are designed to operate in contested environments with high survivability. Their ability to perform a wide range of missions, air-to-air combat, ground attack, reconnaissance, makes them versatile assets for Ukraine's defense strategy. As well, it might be that the Mirage will complement the F-16. So where the F-16s, you might be thinking, well, if we're just going to have F-16s, then we want loadouts for air-to-air capability, loadouts for ground attack and so on and so forth. Well, actually, no, the Mirage can do X and the F-16 can do Y. So these things can work together with each other, rather than compromising one over the other. Or whatnot. Operating F-16 and Mirage 2000-5 jets against Russian aircraft would certainly present challenges for Ukraine. Russia has sophisticated air defense systems like the S-400, although they've got a couple fewer of them now, which can target aircraft at long ranges. Ukrainian pilots need to carefully avoid being shot down, obvs. And Russia fields modern fighter jets such as the Su-35, Su-30, and MiG-31. These aircraft are equipped with advanced avionics, radar, and missile systems, making them hard opponents in air combat. Of course, the munitions they use as well have longer range in air-to-air than do, I believe, both the F-16 and the Mirage. So that will be a challenge still for the Ukrainians. While the Ukrainians' range will improve with their air-to-air munition capabilities, it still won't match the Russian ones, although I think it's not just about range, it's also about survivability. And so some of the more modern, like NATO missiles, once they've got you, like, it's really difficult to escape them. Whereas some of the longer range Russian ones, they may still have more of an ability. It may be that there's more of an ability to escape them in that kind of terminal phase or whatever. I forget what that last stage of a air-to-air rocket is. But you get my point. I'm no expert. Right. Maintaining and supplying these aircraft will be logistically challenging. Ukraine will need a steady support of spare parts, munitions, and technical support, which could strain its resources. I did miss this one, actually. Ukrainian pilots and ground crews will require extensive training to effectively operate and maintain F-16s and Mirages. This transition period could be a window of vulnerability as they gain proficiency with the new systems. Yeah, as soon as they start introducing them, first of all, Russia are going to be hammering the air bases and try and take out the maintenance crews and the storage, etc., but also those pilots will be, I mean, it's one thing training back in Romania or Denmark or Arizona. One thing training on these is another thing flying these on a real mission, releasing real munitions in a war, in a theater of war. So it's at that early stage there will be a lot of vulnerabilities for sure. Despite these challenges, having advanced jets like the F-16 and Mirage would still offer substantial benefits to Ukraine with adequate training, command and control systems and seamless integration with ground and air units, if they do have that. Those aircraft could significantly enhance Ukraine's defense capabilities and provide a counterbalance to Russian air superiority. Everything will also depend on how many France is willing to give. Now, I know there are going to be some Americans out there going, yeah, but still, let's face it, the F-16 is it's a workhorse of a plane. It's very popular because it's very good and it's better than the Mirage, and the Mirage 2005 isn't quite as good, etc. Well, the French here might have a bit of a one over on the Americans. In a war game between Mirage 2000-5 and F-16, the Mirage won. Taiwan simulated a battle between the red team, that is the aggressor, which consisted of F-16AB aircraft. Of course, it depends what variants you have here, doesn't it? And defense team from the Mirage 2000-5. 2 flights of 4 aircraft each took part in the battle. As a result, the Mirage 2005 shot down all 4 F-16A and Bs, while the American-made aircraft managed to shoot down only one of the enemy. Only one of the Mirages. At the same time, it's unclear under what scenario the air battle took place and at what distances it was fought, says PS01. Quote, Mirage 2005 acted as defenders. They could be configured optimally for air combat, perhaps with access to ground radio information. On the other hand, F-16s acting as aggressors could be configured with additional fuel tanks. So I don't know the details of that, but interesting. We consider Mirages as interceptor jets, which are more outstanding than F-16 in high altitude, said someone random on a random Twitter thread. Make of that what you will. So it could be, France 1, US 0. Or it could just be, actually, it depends how they're used, what the context, what the loadout is, what block they are, what, etc. There are so many moving parts, there are variables. But my takeaway from this is that the Mirage, they're all right, and they will definitely them and the F-16s will be a boon for the Ukrainians. And as I explained the other day, you worry about mobilizing troops for the Ukrainians. So like, well, we need 1,000 for a new battalion, and it's like, okay, we're going to have to scour the streets, and it's really difficult in getting all these people out of the economy, etc., etc. But actually, for a squadron of F-16s or Mirages, let's have 20 pilots trained up, or have the point is that actually you will have enough people that should be able to qualify to be decent fighter pilots. And the problem is just time. You could talk about in peacetime maybe money and resources, but actually, we're talking about older planes being phased out. So F-16s and Mirage 2005. I know the Mirage 2005 is still being used. Is that correct? But these are older planes, and there are a lot of them around the world. Both Mirage and the F-16s are used widely, F-16 more so by many other countries. And actually, I would just be getting as many pilots trained up as I possibly could. And if you lose some of these airframes, it's not the end of the world. You might think, oh my goodness, we've lost an F-16, that's terrible. But it shouldn't be as bad as probably the Russians will eventually claim it will be. I mean, you are going to lose pilots, but it's just one person, and it's a bunch of metal. Now, I know each individual is a human being, etc., etc. Like, we know that, but when you're talking about a pilot, a single pilot, and kind of the equivalent in ground force terms, I really think the Ukrainians need to just fill the skies with as many F-16s and Mirages and Gripens as they can get their hands on. That would be absolutely fabulous. It was interesting that, was it Denis Davidov apparently the other day noticed that in one of the videos of the of pilots training on simulators, there were Ukrainian pilots training on Eurofighter Typhoon simulator, and you think, oh, is that just general training, or could that even be added to the mix as well? I don't know. That was just something someone said on a thread. Thank you, guys. You are wow. In one war game, a Gripen landed on a Eurofighter. Does not say much. I don't know what part of the conversation I've just gone in on that bit of live chat there, but yes, and this is the point from Stephen Bendal, who I believe, Stephen, are you in Ukraine at the moment? That's what I got from one of your comments this morning. Both Mirage and F-16s are far better than anything Ukraine is flying currently. Yeah, and yeah, get lots of them, and then throw in the Gripens as well. I mean, everyone seems to be in agreement that Gripens would actually be the best. Give them Meteor, like the distance you can get on some of these munitions. Fantastic. Well, I just want to say a few thanks before we continue by looking at a little bit more at airframes. Brian Ivy, as ever, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate you, mate. Thanks for popping along and for that super sticker. Very, very kind. Thanks to Stephen Bendal. Greetings from Ukraine. There you go. Presently in Vinnytsia. So he's answered my question presciently. So thank you, my friend. Been a member for 7 months. But he's always been a legend. A Wild Sage from Nizar. Oh, choice, mate. Gives me a really great opportunity to just test out my Kiwi, eh? So look, cuz, really appreciate you being here, Wild Sage. Sending love from New Zealand. Well, kia kaha, bro. Really bloody awesome to see you, mate. Really, look, fushing chups for us tonight. Yeah. Anyway, that's my awesome New Zealand accent done. We're going to get through the accents today. I'm going to lose viewers. Susan Melendy gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that. And finally, for now, Rick from the Netherlands, awesome stuff. Quick drop in for a thanks. We'll have to look back later. Well, when you do, Rick, you will hear my thanks to you. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. Right, back to the news. According to a press release from the Ministry of the Armed Forces, so that's of France, Sébastien Lecornu, thanked the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, for the first positive feedback from the US administration on the work to integrate AASM bombs on the F-16 jets that Ukraine will soon be equipped with. So that's what I was talking about earlier, that the F-16s are going to be equipped with the ability to fire those French bombs. And this is all great. It's interoperability. It's all about, allies coming together and putting their heads together, as well as their wallets and their military stocks, and saying, like, how can we make all of this stuff work together? We've got the bombs, you've got the planes, let's make our bombs work on your planes, and you don't have to provide everything. We can provide something and you can provide something else, and that's how we kind of specialize, if you like. Nothing like almost cold tea. Right, moving on. There's an awful lot of better things than that, actually. The Ukrainian armor company has delivered a batch of at least 10 ex-Italian VCC-2 armor personnel carriers to the Lyut Brigade, the Ukrainian Special Police Forces. The VCC-2 is a modified version of the M113A1, which was built under license in Italy. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier with regard to the M113. Here, it's being given to special police forces. So it's the ability to use vehicles that in different ways. You know, there are needs all over Ukraine for many different things, and maybe there are some units using things far back from the front lines where their equipment's actually more useful on the front lines than this stuff that's coming in, and so you can send that stuff to the front and you can take this that's coming from, in this case, Italy. Not a huge number of them, but it's always going to help, isn't it? And it looks like the Ukrainian company has got them up to scratch. Now, let's talk about NATO. So Jens Stoltenberg is scrapping plans to set up a 5-year fund of military aid to Ukraine after facing pushback from alliance members. According to Bloomberg, under the new proposal, allies will commit to spending a total of at least 40 billion per year in aid for Ukraine. So I guess there was a bit of an issue with giving money to put in a central pot. This is how I understand it, that NATO would then organize in terms of procuring equipment for Ukraine. This is a case of saying, okay, but we'll have an agreement amongst all of NATO that this amount of money needs to be spent on support for Ukraine. And so it's possibly two sides of a square, but just being done differently. And then that gives, I guess, I wonder if the pushback would have been an economic pushback. This goes back to my earlier conversation. So it's not that any of the NATO countries, Hungary, apart from Hungary, Turkey maybe, but mainly Hungary, Slovakia. Anyway, apart from a few of those countries, everyone would agree that, yeah, okay, that money is what Ukraine needs. But if we're a country that is having to pay, I don't know, 1 billion euros to this, or $1 billion to this NATO plan, and we only get back $50 million worth of manufacturing in our country, then we are not going to be up for that. What we would like is, yeah, you can make us give $1 billion to Ukraine, but we would like to keep all of that inside our country by motivating, stimulating our own industry there. So I think that's why it's okay. As long as all of you guys spend that amount of money, we won't organize it centrally and give out contracts here and there, but you guys can spend them individually in your own countries, as long as we're getting to the same points. And there might need to be some strategic overview as to what kind of stuff gets made between everyone, and I'm sure NATO would keep a handle on that. But I'm sure the pushback will be an economic one, not a military strategic one, is my opinion there. Okay. After facing resistance from several NATO members, this is no reports giving you a little bit more detail. A 5-year, $100 billion aid plan for Ukraine is being sized down. So it looks like it's sizing down to a new proposal at least at $43 billion per year. Well, actually, it's not sizing it down. Instead of $100 billion over 5 years, $43 billion a year. Well, 2.5 years then would get you that $100 billion. So, okay, on lethal and non-lethal aid, which could get backing from NATO defense ministers. And several NATO countries have agreed to send military instructors to Ukraine in a coalition with France, according to Macron. This is really, I think, significant, like I said earlier. So, quote, you asked me whether France is ready to send instructors to Ukraine alone. I can tell you that we are not alone. Several of our partners have already agreed to do this, Macron said in a joint press conference with Zelensky at the Elysee Palace. Now, we have heard from a number of countries saying in principle they don't have a problem with that. Some countries being very explicit that they do have a problem with it. But I think that some of the Nordic states, a few other states are saying, yeah, we've got no problem with sending instructors. So we can probably guess at what countries they might be. Macron said he hoped to finalize a coalition in the coming days, which would be ready to send military trainers to Ukraine rapidly. This is a legitimate request by Ukraine, that's a quote, and is not an escalation of the war, according to the French president. Quote, it follows the guidelines we have set from the beginning. We are not at war with Russia, but we are fully committed to supporting Ukraine. Asked to comment on threats from Moscow to target any French military personnel sent to Ukraine, Macron said, who are we to back down before Russian invocations and threats? Macron's words, building on similar remarks in a TV interview last night, amount to a clear statement of intent by France to send military personnel into Western Ukraine in the near future. No decision has yet been made. France still hopes to enlarge the coalition of the willing, but Macron has evidently made up his mind. His comments followed a 90-minute meeting with Zelensky in which France agreed to create a $200 million support fund of grants and loans to rebuild industrial and transport infrastructure in Ukraine. $60 million will be ring-fenced for reconstructing energy facilities targeted by Russian attacks. And that's kind of what I detailed earlier. Earlier in the day, Zelensky in France for the D-Day anniversary addressed a half-empty National Assembly. Most Le Penist and hard-left deputies boycotted his speech because they claimed that it was a Macron campaign event for Sunday's French vote in the European elections. The Macron camp said that, au contraire, the far-right Rassemblement National and hard-left La France Insoumise were displaying their collaborationist instincts towards Vladimir Putin. That's interesting. So although Marine Le Pen was there, I wonder if the far left and the far right, because there was a half empty, and I was wondering, I didn't really look into it, but basically Zelensky spoke to French Parliament and they all stood up and they applauded, standing ovation for a minute, including Marine Le Pen, who is traditionally pro-Russian and a bit anti-Ukraine, but I think she understands which side of bread is buttered. But it was half empty, so interesting to hear that those, unsurprising, those two extremes weren't there. Now, Philip O'Brien talks about this idea of sending instructors to Ukraine and says this is like a bit bigger than you might think, and the speed with which this has been achieved is actually something to be congratulated. So a major strategic Rubicon is being crossed by European states, he says, who understand just what is at stake for all of their futures in Ukraine. It's been amazingly fast. When it was first mentioned in February, people scoffed and cowered. Now it's happening, and it's only step one. It's really, really a good point there. And it wasn't all that long ago that Macron kind of mentioned it tentatively, and everyone, ooh, and a lot of us who are very, very pro-Ukraine were like, this is brilliant, Macron, thank you for saying this. Now the Overton window's moved, we can now talk about that. We're not just talking about that now. It's literally in the coming days, there's going to be a coalition of instructors going to Ukraine. It appears, fingers crossed. And hopefully, there will be a good number of countries who will contribute to that, though we might not know for sure. I think it's just really good. Keith Kane, hello, I am live and alive. Welcome along, my friend. Okay, so the Kremlin's top genocidal no, we're moving on to geopolitical stuff now. So that's off the subject of military aid and equipment, etc., etc. Just, I guess the context to this is, remember that there are 5 propagandists who have had information submitted to the International Criminal Court with regard to genocidal rhetoric for inciting genocide, which is, this is war crime stuff. I think it's an absolute shoo-in. Some of the things that these people have said are nothing short of absolutely despicable. And people like Julia Davis here, Vlada Knowlton does a lot of support for Julia Davis and her Russian Media Monitor translation of these propagandists on a daily basis. They have documented huge numbers of examples of this genocidal rhetoric. Now, here's just last night there must have been a show on that was just replete with all sorts of things being claimed. I've just picked out 2, but let it be known there's much more stuff. Here's Solovyov, our good old friend Solovyov, who is a despicable human being. The Kremlin's top genocidal propagandist, Solovyov, boasts that Russia, quote, destroyed about 70% of Ukraine's power system and that they will demolish it all. Just happily, we are going to just take out the power for all of these 40 million people. We're going to do that. And allies, says Vlada Knowlton, like questioning incredulously, allies are still conflicted about allowing Ukraine to fight back. Like, here we are arguing still whether they can use ATACMS into Russia. And we've got Russian TV propagandists saying, we're going to screw over all of Ukraine's energy infrastructure so that none of their population can have heat and they all die in the cold of the winter. That's what Russia at the top really think. And it still blows my mind that there are people out there who defend Russia and attack Ukraine. But I don't think they're immersed on a daily basis in a way that we are in what's going on and are hearing and interacting with the actual rhetoric of so many of these Russian ne'er-do-wells. And when I say ne'er-do-well, that is a real understatement, obviously, for these terrible people. A quote, another one here from Vladimir Solovyov. Because all Nazi dirtbags have to be eradicated. Do you understand why it has to be cleansed? Have you ever tried getting rid of bed bugs? That is another incitement to genocide, and it's a real tried and tested mechanism, this, which is the dehumanization. First of all, Nazi dirtbags, which they're not, right? And then you are synonymizing them with bed bugs. You are dehumanizing them. And lesson, this is genocide 101, which is the first thing you do if you want to eradicate a whole bunch of people, is that you equate them with less than humans. And as soon as they're less than humans, you give yourself permission to do all sorts of terrible things to them. This is, Hannah Arendt kind of like totalitarianism, genocide 101. It's terrible, and it's what the Russian propagandists are advocating. And if you want to know what the Russians believe, turn on the freaking television and listen to them. And if you want to know who the good guys and the bad guys are, turn on the freaking television and listen to them. I'm staggered with the amount of head in sand rhetoric from people around the world. It really, really gets my goat. Like I've said to you before, the war absolutely infuriates me because it's so unfair. But there's this added level of injustice when you've got people who should know better in the US, in France, in Germany, in the UK, less so in the UK, actually. We're all generally on the same page in the UK. But so many other people, I'm not trying to be pro-UK because, I'm not like that. But we just have a fairly solid handle on who the bad guys are in this. But there's so many other people around the world are like still promoting this pro-Russian sentiment, and you're like, that is that extra level of infuriation. Is not only is it completely unfair this is happening, but it's completely unfair that people are then justifying this happening and picking the wrong side, and that opinion is growing because it's unfairly amplified by people like Elon Musk on Twitter, by people like David Sachs on Twitter, like people like Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor, who are given these platforms and allowed to shout their disinformation out into the spaces where these insidious tendrils of influence find fertile ground to root down in MAGA America, in AfD Germany, so on and so forth, in La Liga Italy. It just really, really gets my goat. Sorry, I'm beginning to rant, so I will move on. Okay, EU has reached a point of no return. Hungary blocking Ukraine again, and soon in the presidency chair to block everything. This is Guy Verhofstadt. So Guy Verhofstadt is I like him. During Brexit, he's a Belgian politician who is very, very pro-EU. And he was kind of lifted up as the poster boy for the UK remaining in the EU by the Leave. Actually, he was lifted up as a bogeyman of the EU. And he got a lot of stick, but if you're like really Remain like I was and am, I was like, by the way, what he's saying is right. By the way, what he's saying is right. By the way, and actually he's dead on here, which is there's a big problem coming up here for the rotating presidency going to Hungary. Hungary are so overtly pro-Russia that we've got an issue. Now, Belgium, who presently have the presidency, are looking at ways of curtailing, invoking Article 7 and whatnot to take away the voting rights of Hungary, because they are being really problematic. But then you have discussions about, well, surely this is democracy in action. The problem with the EU is the requirement for unanimity. And if you can never get unanimity because one element of that voting bloc is compromised directly by Russian money and influence, and actually this is like a part of the war effort, then there's an awful lot of tension between the desire to want to fulfill democratic ideals and the desire for national security and the bloc security in the EU from an actual enemy that has infiltrated into the bloc. You can't just sit back and do nothing. You've got to do something. And so part of the fight back against Russia has to be because there's plenty of evidence there, if you want to look into how much Russia has influenced Hungary politically and economically, etc., etc. Anyway, I digress. He says we need. Well, no, I don't digress. It's on point. We need to finally use Article 7 and take away Orban's voting rights and extortion power. So Orban is extorting the EU on behalf of Russia, and this is the nefarious activity of Hungary. And I can tell you there'll be an awful lot of people in the threads who would agree that Hungary suck, because we see it on a daily basis. Not by Hungary, I mean obviously the Fidesz party and Orban. Now, we're going to return to Hungary a little bit later, because there is possibly some good news, hopefully, on the horizon there, maybe. I'm going to go back to D-Day, and I just want to, and I know some of you will go, oh, come on, mate, stop giving Biden too much kudos. And I'm a Republican, and Biden's some old doddery man who I think's the most evil human being on earth. My opinion is, yeah, Biden is probably too old, but it's better him than you know who. But also, he's just a fairly safe pair of hands. The US economy is in a really good place. The infrastructure bill, CHIPS Act, all these things that were actual tangible outcomes of the Biden presidency before this last session of Congress that's been basically locked down by hyperpartisanship, actually achieved a load of stuff. And then when you look back on the Trump presidency and you think, well, tax cuts for the rich, and that's basically all that was achieved, and they're still paying for that. It's a bit of a shocker. So Biden came out in Normandy for the D-Day commemorations and actually did nail his speech, right? I was listening to Francis Durney, who's a Daily Telegraph, proper right wing. Like, I've had my own little tete-a-tete with. I like Francis Durney, and I think the Ukraine the Latest podcast is brilliant from the Daily Telegraph. But he is kind of your Daily Telegraph Brexiteer, that kind of positioning, but really strong on Ukraine war. He was there at the speech, and he said, I wanted to play it to you, but I can't do it through this browser. But anyway, his synopsis was like, that speech was barnstorming. And like, that's not something you would hear from Francis Durney, and he was there. So I just think like it's worth understanding that if you don't like Biden, you should still have a little bit of space in your heart to say, do you know what? He did well there. That was a good speech, and he nailed it. And I have to say that I think he nailed it. Anyway, with the things he said and the confidence he said it, etc., etc. So, as Mark Hartland said, who is himself politically aligned to Biden, but he's a former. You see him all over CNN and whatnot. He's a former general. He's in charge of part of NATO forces in Europe, wasn't he? He's formerly a Bradley, in charge of a Bradley crew. Back in the day. Those who want to contribute to America will always hear the whispers of those who saved our nation. We must be the ones who followed their example. And magnificent speech by POTUS. So it's got a lot of plaudits. Now, I'm going to go on to, I know I mentioned this the other day, and some people said, oh, really? Of course, the BBC are going to be like having a go at him for doing this. I know this is very British and parochial, but what happened is Rishi Sunak, our prime minister, was there at the D-Day celebrations, and then he left early to go and do a a political interview to try and get him off the hook for lying about the opposition party supposedly causing, if they are voted in, there'd be a £2,000 a year tax rise for people in the UK, and that's been found out to be a lie, and he's trying to defend that, and he left early from D-Day. Anyway, I was saying that he was getting absolutely harangued, and I played a clip on BBC Newsnight, and people like some people are like, oh, that's just the BBC. No, so actually he's been harangued by right-wing media big time. Like Rishi Sunak is being rinsed over this. And it's because if you imagine right-wing media is going to be all about tradition, war, commemoration, all that kind of stuff is really high on the agenda for that kind of conservative thinking. And so the Spectator, for example, is a very right-wing news media source, took him to the cleaners. Loads of people taken to the cleaners. I just love this though. So this is going back to, we fought them on the beaches, we fought, etc., etc., etc. The Churchill speech, and there's this big billboard, he left them on the beaches. And actually, if you look at in the bottom left, lest we forget, come July the 4th. So July the 4th is the election day. He left them on the beaches. This is really harsh. He left them on the beaches. He left them in the nursing homes. He left us unprotected in rubbish bags and marigolds. He left the children go hungry. He left the schools to rot and mold. He left pensioners riding buses just so they could escape the cold. Ouch. Anyway, there is a lot of political capital here from people who don't like Rishi Sunak, but also, and the important point I want to try to make is there's a lot of people going after him from his own camp. And in fact, his Penny Mordaunt, one of my sort of local MPs, localish to me, was in a debate, TV debate, and she had to apologize on behalf and said it was a terrible decision. So if you've got your own MPs speaking for you saying it's a terrible decision, then it was a terrible decision. Anyway, to link that back to Ukraine and Russia, we have Rebar here, the pro-Russian source, absolutely taking Sunak to the cleaners here, talking about that as well. So it has not gone down well with anyone, pretty much. Anyway, Zelensky tells Biden, quote, "It's very important that you stay with us. This bipartisan support in Congress, all American people stay with Ukraine, like it was during World War II, how the United States helped save human lives to save Europe. And we count on your continuing support in standing with us shoulder to shoulder. Thank you so much." Speaking about Biden's decision to lift the ban on US weapons and inside Russia, Zelensky said, "Your decisions had a very positive influence. I don't want to share everything, all the details with the press, sorry, but I think there are some details on the battlefield that you need to hear from us." I think that's kind of a little bit of a euphemism for, we've still got conversations to have. We would like to have a little bit more. Please stop restricting us. And this is a criticism I will have of Biden, or certainly his administration. And I think people like Jake Sullivan, who are anti-escalation to the point where they are restricting Ukraine from being able to do what they should be able to do. Now, the US begrudgingly, sort of, or at least it took an awful lot of pressure, changed their stance on the use of HIMARS rockets and missiles into, or guided multiple launch rockets into Russia in Kharkiv and Kursk regions. Permission was given to, really, that's going to be, if you're firing them, say, 20 kilometers back from the border, it's going to be sort of 50, 60 kilometers into Russian territory. Now, he allowed that, but not ATACMS. So that took way too much time. And what happened when Biden allowed that? I'll tell you what happened in the war. Ukraine absolutely hammered Russia and took out a couple of S-400 surface-to-air missile systems. And what did Russia do? The square root of NAFL, right? They didn't do anything because all they've got is nukes, and they're not going to do nukes in losing a couple of SAMs, right? Surface-to-air missile systems. That's not going to happen. So would Putin have used nuclear missiles had they allowed ATACMS to be used? No, of course he wouldn't. So goodness me, come on, allow ATACMS and allow Ukraine to do more. Now, interestingly, Biden has in interview used the phrase allowing them to attack, I think, 200 kilometers into Russian territory. So there is some weirdness going on there, because that's more than the 84 kilometers of the regular HIMARS type missiles used. But less than 8 ATACMS, or it could allow for 8 ATACMS. That he could really have let the cat out of the bag that 8 ATACMS might be allowed. I don't know, but definitely Ukraine need to be able to use as much as they can within Russia. Now, talking about American politics, Jay in Kyiv here pointing out the US senator cites a Russian disinformation account. So this is JD Vance. Why this is important? So he's saying, JD Vance, the Biden economy is a war on American citizens. Even though Biden's economy is doing really well and it's done better than all G7 economies and has bounced back better after COVID than most of the rest of the world, etc., etc. But they're still going to have a pop at it. But he uses a Russian disinformation source to do this. And that's really problematic because, and I'll tell you why, because if I was a betting man, I bet that Donald Trump's vice president is either going to be Marco Rubio or JD Vance. And that means we have JD Vance, who's deeply anti-Ukraine and is citing Russian disinformation sources for his arguments. This is worrying. There is an infiltration into American politics, in particularly one area of American politics, that is deeply troubling. We have 2 new lawmakers who have been appointed by Mike Johnson to the Intelligence Committee, who are both seemingly avowedly anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia. On the Intelligence Committee, that is the committee that deals with much of the information concerned with decision-making around support for Ukraine. It blows my mind. And here we have David Sachs announcing. Now, David Sachs is huge on Twitter. He is is a big friend of Elon Musk, and Elon Musk amplifies David Sachs all the time. He's saying, why I'm backing Trump, right? And David Sachs is a massive anti-Ukraine, massive pro-Russian voice, amplified by Elon Musk, showing his open support for Trump. There seems to be this coalescing of pro-Russian thought processes on the MAGA right in the US, and it is deeply worrying because I think the US is becoming somewhat compromised, and it should worry Americans in terms of their own national security. They have a Russian virus circulating in their veins, in the veins of the American political body. And I honestly think that there needs to be some it needs a pro-Ukrainian enema to get rid of this virus, the American political system. It's a real freaking challenge. And then when you hear that Donald Trump's going to unilaterally assert much more control over US budget, setting up a dramatic constitutional showdown if re-elected, allies aim to cancel everything from WHO to clean energy, IRA, dollars to international aid, with or without approval from Congress. Part of Project 2025, which is a blueprint for Trump when he gets in, is to make the US go more authoritarian. And when you start seeing some of the people that are being put in place and some of the people that are supporting Trump, and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm worried about the US going in an authoritarian pro-Russian direction. It is truly, truly worrying. Just be careful, guys. Like, you might not want to vote for Biden. Hold your nose and just don't vote for Trump. Honestly, I think he's dangerous, and he loves his dictators too much. Anyway, Putin has met with Milorad Dodik, the president of the Republic of Srpska, I don't know how to say that, at the sidelines of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. So we got little and large here. Now, Putin has met with this chap, Dodik. And you might ask, what is Republic of Srpska? Okay, let's do a little bit of learning today. It is a lesson about Republika Srpska. So it's an unusual political entity that grew out of the violent dissolution of Yugoslavia. It's independent in some ways, but also part of the larger country that is Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Herzegovina, depending on how you pronounce it. So Republika Srpska consists of 2 separate entities connected via a neutral district. Brčko in the north, the Brčko district was created after the war in 1995 to ensure that Bosnian Serbs did not control a single contiguous territory with Bosnia and Herzegovina, bordering Serbia. Brčko has its own administrative status within Bosnia-Herzegovina. Okay, so you've got Bosnia-Herzegovina, and you've got these two elements here that are the Srpska Republika. And that has its leader within Bosnia-Herzegovina. I suppose you could say like England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. Could be some sort of parallel. But yeah, so and the rest of this darker grey area is the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So all those three areas make the state of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So together, the Republika Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina make up the state of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's home to the Bosniaks, the Croats, and the Serbs. According to its constitution, the state of Bosnia-Herzegovina is in charge of its own foreign affairs, foreign trade, customs and currency policy, as well as migration issues, international law enforcement, telecommunications, and its airspace. It also gained control over its own defense policy in 2006, important, following the adoption of the new law on defense of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Now, this is the worrying part. So whereas the EU is unpopular in the Republika Srpska, Russia has many supporters. On January the 9th, Republika Srpska President Milorad Dodik awarded Russian President Putin the entity's highest honor for his, quote, patriotic concern and love for Republika Srpska. The honor was bestowed on the 31st anniversary of the creation of the entity, which is neither a proper state nor seeks to be one. Rather, the Republika wants to see all Serbs united in a single state, a major provocation for Bosnia-Herzegovina and for Europe. So this is kind of your, not breakaway areas, but the areas of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a bit like, I guess, Transnistria although that's more separate than these areas. In Moldova is very pro-Russian. Here we have the pro-Russian area that is overtly pro-Russian, right? So now we have the St. Petersburg Economic Forum that's taken place in St. Petersburg recently, where you've had people turn up. So the foreign minister of Hungary was there, Peter Szijjártó, obviously, because Hungary and Russia. St. Petersburg Economic Forum has been a big annual thing, but last year not very many people turned up because of the war, and the year before it might have been cancelled. I don't know. Anyway, statements about a possible referendum on the independence of the Republika Srpska and the possibility of its succession from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This could jeopardize the European integration of the region. So this is the Balkans region, where you've got other places like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Kosovo, etc., etc. Croatia, I've said. Moreover, he is aiding and abetting the increase of any conflict in Europe that would distract from the war in Ukraine. This is Putin meddling in the Balkans to foment discord and disunity in Europe as a whole. Okay, it's not in the EU, but there are possible intentions to go in that direction. Again, we see Russia getting involved. This is typical Russian political strategizing and political meddling. It's likely that Putin plans to use stability in the Balkans as a barter card for Ukraine. Everyone should be very careful about funding and subsidizing some political parties in Europe, the source of which is the Kremlin, whose mission is to increase conflict and instability in European countries. Really important there. Right. Now to go just hop a little bit across a border or two to Hungary. So not only Georgia, says Jay in Kiev, absolutely huge anti-Russian rally in Budapest right now. Thousands are not happy with the kleptocrat Orban turning the country into an impoverished Russian colony. So if you don't know what a kleptocrat is, kleptocracy is corruption because you're stealing. Kleptomaniac is someone that steals. So it's stealing, it's corruption at the heart of the political institutions and processes. And here, I mean, just look at that. So here you've got Peter Magyar, who is, I mean, that literally means Peter Hungarian, I think. So he was formerly just to remind you, formerly of the Fidesz party, and he was married to someone. They were both involved with Fidesz. He then got divorced from his missus, I believe, and has released subsequently a recording of his missus that implicates Fidesz in corruption and implicates Orban as well. And he is therefore a bit of a thorn in the side of the Fidesz ruling party. The question is, how much control does Fidesz have over democratic processes? A bit like Georgia and the Georgian Dream Party. How much do the Georgian Dream Party, with all the protests going on there, have an iron grip on the democratic processes in Georgia? So when they come to elections in October this year in Georgia, you might have this groundswell of protests for the government, but if they can rig things in their favor, this is all irrelevant. Then if you have elections that are rigged and they find in favor of Georgian Dream, will that then cause a massive uproar and protest that made the last ones in Tbilisi look like child's play? I don't know. Or does that allow them to suppress, maybe with security forces, maybe with thugs that they get from Russia, as we saw recently? You know, Georgia is in this interesting time. What I think Hungary could be, when you look at pictures like this and you see a lot of a big swell of protest against Orban and Fidesz, then one is hopeful. There is a silver lining here. But if the Hungarians can control the political system enough, then they can stamp this kind of protest out. If they can mobilize voters from usually the rural areas, there's often this rural urban divide with like fascism and these kind of nationalistic movements, where you are going back to the kind of bucolic heartlands. If you want to read a good book on that, it's a really easy read, quick read. Read Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, and it gives you the 10 pillars. I went through it in one of my recent videos, those 10 pillars. One of them is that like rural urban divide and going back to the bucolic heartlands. It's what the Nazis did in the 30s, and it's what we see quite often. I mean, interestingly, there's a big if you want to look at conservatism in the US, you look at a map of the US, you get reds all over. So in the US, red is Republican. Those big states, big rural states, are largely Republican, conservative, very conservative, and the tiny states that have huge populations, the urban states, are very much Democrat. You look at New York, you look at California, etc., etc. That happens all around the world. So in the UK, you look at a map of the UK, political map, and the colours are opposite in the UK. The Conservatives are blue. It's massively blue right across, because all those big counties and constituencies that are rural have much greater land, much fewer people in them, because they're spread out on these farmlands and market towns and whatnot, are much more conservative. And the liberals are all squeezed into, not all of them, but predominantly exist in the much smaller constituencies that are really densely populated. But on a map, they look tiny. So the better maps to look at are hexagonal maps that take constituencies and make them all the same size, literally like geographic size, if you like. And actually those maps give you a much better handle on how parties are doing in places like the UK. Because if you look at it just purely geographically, the map looks overwhelmingly blue in the UK, and in America overwhelmingly red, because those larger constituencies that are not very densely populated have a much greater geographical footprint than the smaller, densely populated urban constituencies. Anyway, I'm massively digressing here, as I'm prone to do. You know what? Just going off on one. Stay on target, Pierce. Stay on target. Right. Okay. I just got to get my X-wing back on, like shooting down that opening, so I can blow up the Death Star. Right. I have no idea what you guys have been talking about either. So I will just finish on this before I go back to thanking you guys for your awesomeness. Right. People are protesting against right-wing extremism in Berlin. Right. What this is, again, kind of similar to what we've just been seeing. I don't really know. Some people are telling me about the Hungarian Peter Magyar, because he is formerly Fidesz. There are some people in Hungary that are not quite sure what the opposition is. Basically feeble in, and has been for some time, and can't get together and coalesce enough. So it's going to be interesting to see actually where Peter Magyar positions himself, and etc. etc. But in the rest of Europe, we have MEP elections, so elections for members of European Parliament, and these are people that then go in to vote on things in the European Parliament, right? And there's been this surge of the right wing in Europe. This has been well documented. I've written on it in the past, articles on that in the past. And that is being fomented, it's being influenced, it's being manipulated by Russia and by Putin. Part of their strategy is to weaponize grievances that generally already exist. They do make up things out of whole cloth, right? So the Russians will give you disinformation that is just completely false, but they also do a lot of amplifying things that actually exist, but making them seem like a much bigger problem than they really are. Immigration is one of the really easy targets for them. So they'll take the grievances that people have about immigration and then amplify them on social media. So they have the bots and trolls. Bots are the automated profiles that automatically share things and like things, but they aren't someone sitting there typing. If you see the bot farms, you often have like a wall of 1,000 mobile telephones with SIM cards in, all wired up to like a central computer, and you have someone controlling all of those bots, right, and telling them to do things. And that's why it's often copy and paste. They say the same things. You're like, yeah, all these people are saying exactly the same things in exactly the same ways, because it's been copy and pasted and sent out to all of those profiles. And then trolls are real people that often have lots of sock puppet accounts and then are typing, pretending to be Jim Bob from Idaho or whatever, going, hey y'all, I really hate X, Y, and Z. And you think, oh my goodness, look at all these Americans that hate X, Y, and Z. And actually half of them are bots and half of them are trolls, and none of them are American or French or German or Polish or whatever. So with the MEP, with the European elections now literally taking place right now, we've seen a surge of the far right in Europe, and this has been, as I've said, influenced by Russia, because they, particularly on the subject of immigration, because they realize how divisive immigration is, right? People get really, really concerned about immigration. It is a hot button topic, and it has been for a long time, an awful long time. You can go back in the UK, Enoch Powell and the Rivers of Blood, etc., etc., and you can come back to Brexit, and you can look at Geert Wilders in his PVV in Holland. You can look at the AfD in Germany. You look at the Confederacy and even the PIS in Poland. You can look at Fidesz in Hungary. All three coalition parties in Italy, La Liga, Berlusconi's one, and Brothers of Italy. You can go to Spain, to Vox. You can go to France and Marine Le Pen's National Rally, Rassemblement National. All of these parties adopt the same positions, and they're all being influenced. There's often money swapping hands. We've had politicians in Germany that have been found to be taking backhanders or having influence directly from Russian handlers. We've seen some of the Baltic nations, Zadanok or whatever her name was, being influenced by Russia. We got lots of, it's not always, sometimes the far left, but the thing about the far left, while you can mobilize them to be anti-Ukraine and etc., etc., they're not as easy manipulatable with something like immigration, right? Immigration is so divisive, such an obviously easy target, such an easy subject to manipulate and amplify, that actually the far right, I've argued before, is just easier. It's just a much more natural fit for the Russian state, which has actually been itself surging to the right as a nationalist entity. And if you look at how Putin has used actual far right groups over the last 15 years and has mobilized them inside Russia, fascinating stuff has been written on that. So I think what you've seen is the extreme in Europe be influenced by Putin, and these MEP elections right now are a real concern, because you will see a load more AfD politicians and far right politicians in Europe being voted in. Now, if you're concerned about things like immigration, then cool. Okay, if you want the EU to split up and have these parties just take their countries back to a kind of smaller, in the UK we call it a little Englander kind of scenario, then okay, fair enough. But let it be known that what's really behind this amplification is that by disuniting the EU and by getting people concerned with these other topics like immigration, you allow through the back door, or you co-opt these people into supporting anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian stuff like getting energy back online, hydrocarbons from Russia, and stopping aid to Ukraine. Russia know that they can't win the military war against Ukraine because the West, the EU and the US will keep supporting Ukraine with weapons that are better and more, I think, are more numerous now than the Russian weapons. So how does Russia win? They have to stop these countries and these organizations getting the weaponry to Ukraine. How do they do that? They like a virus, infect the US political system, and like a virus, they infect the European political system. And this is what we are seeing. So the European elections and the American elections in 2024 are going to be affected, are presently being affected by Russia. So then when I see this in Berlin, sorry, that was a big sidebar. People protest against right-wing extremism in Berlin on the eve of the European Parliament elections. According to the police, more than 15,000 people came out to the rally in Berlin's Tiergarten Park. The organizers estimated the number at 30,000 people. An alliance of various forces organized the action under the slogan, "Stop right-wing extremism, let's protect democracy." So this is all about, democratic ideals and so on and so forth, and mobilizing the vote in line with that kind of thinking. The protesters said they were concerned about the high ratings of the pre-extremist parties before the upcoming elections. I don't know what it means to be pre-extremist, but you get the point there. Then just to move on from that topic, but before I do so, let's just say a massive thanks to you kind people. And the first person is JJ. So thank you for your really kind super sticker. I watch you every day, and I owe you for the time you spend on these videos. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Honestly, JJ, thank you so much for your generosity. It's insanely cool. It does allow me to keep doing this. I mean, this is what I do now. I've got, as many of you know, I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis. I'm not very good at walking, and I am now working from home. So this is what I do. Just MS paid to my career. So thank you. Thank you to Vadim Orlov, who's become a member. That's legendary. Thank you to Joe Hales, who's a continued supporter of the channel. Trust the steamed arrivals soon. I'm not sure what that means, Joe. What are the steamed arrivals? Have we got some steamed cabbage coming in, or maybe some rice? I don't know, but I trust it. I will continue to trust it. Thank you. And Aussie T, absolutely hit like, subscribe, share, definitely. And Vadim Orlov has gifted 580p. Not only becomes a new member, but then straight away gifts 5 memberships. Thank you so much. That's really kind. And last one for the time being, Johnny. Thanks, Johnny. Always pops in there. Really appreciate your Danish love. That's really cool, Johnny. Right. Okay. Onwards and upwards. UK, we're just coming to the end now. UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron held a video call with someone impersonating former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. The BBC and other media outlets reported on June the 7th, citing comments from the UK's Foreign Office. It actually gets worse than that, because this was not only a phone call, it was a video call as well, and they didn't even recognize it at the time, I believe. So this is a video call and a phone call. Hoodwinked. This has happened a number of times around the world to different people. It happened to Georgia Maloney recently, if you remember, where she admitted that there was tiredness in continuing to support Ukraine. The war was tiring them, and that was something that came out of that. And she had to then, fight that fire after that came out. We just had to be so careful. We trust no one. It's really sad that's how we operate these days. Trust no one, apart from trusting steamed arrivals. Definitely, Joe. But other than that, trust no one. NATO looks to create a new special envoy post in Ukraine, according to foreign policy. So the plan, which would be unveiled at the upcoming NATO summit in Washington in July, if approved, would see the creation of a new NATO senior civilian representative post based in Ukraine. The new envoy would coordinate the alliance's support for Ukraine, including the flows of military assistance to Kyiv from various Western countries. Some Western officials welcome the creation of a new envoy post as part of a bigger package of NATO support for Ukraine. I'm just surprised it hasn't happened already. Another part of it could be the establishment of a 5-year, $100 billion fund, although we know that's changed. However, the Allies did not support this initiative, and the Secretary Jens Stoltenberg from him. Instead, he asked countries to keep up their current contributions to the tune, and we've heard that already, to the tune of about $43 billion per year as it stands. Right. Penultimately, Zimbabwe intends to join BRICS. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They're in this alternative to the US hegemony, so supreme power, I guess, world view, including international currency, the dollar being the international currency. They want to provide an alternative to that. Now, you may laugh at them not being able to do that realistically, but they are gaining nations and support from those nations. Like Saudi Arabia wants to join. We've got Zimbabwe. Now, yeah, okay, they might not be the most worrying nations in terms of geopolitical influence, but it's chipping away around the world, getting people on your side, and then growing that influence. So this is the long game. I know lots of people laugh at me when I worry about BRICS. It's not so much about whether they're going to be able to take over the world in 2026, but it's about 2040. Right, it's about the long game, and this is a group of more autocratic nations that are gaining greater and greater influence and power around the world. And finally, Latvia, as I've said, Latvia, Malta, and Slovakia started elections to the EU Parliament today. And voting's already begun in some countries. So, yeah, it's something we've got to keep an eye on over the next few days, week or so. Just a few more thanks. Gary, thank you very much for your super sticker there, Gary. Really appreciate that, mate. And Wayne Metcalf has gifted 5 ATP memberships. Oh, Wayne, you lucky bugger. Look at that. Look at the hair on Wayne. I dream of that. I used to have long hair, like long, wavy, beautifully auburn hair. And then age just kicked me in the balls. And yeah, anyway, I digress. Thanks, Wayne. Really appreciate that. 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Jack Ray, and not for the first time, thanks for 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's really kind of you, Jack. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These members are super cool. Hoki Salom says, thanks for all your comprehensive updates, and gives a super sticker. Thank you, Hoki Salom. I really appreciate that. Just some member thanks really quickly. So we've got, goodness me, Vadim Orlov, again, 5 ATP memberships, really amazing. Matthias Meyer, 1 ATP membership gifted. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Vadim. Really, really kind. Lyle P, thanks for maintaining a bit of humanity, even when discussing the enemy's death count. I do try and do that. I talk about how, to be honest, when we talk about daily death stats, you've got to remember that when you say 1,210 people, Russians who have died, they are human beings. Now, I know people, we talked about dehumanization earlier. It's really easy to say, because what Russia are doing is horrible, that those people are horrible, and they may be prima facie horrible. But my question is always, yeah, but how did they get to being horrible? It's a bit like saying, what went wrong with this human being that turned them into a murderer, right? And let's try and unpick that and try and understand how they got there, and realize that these really destructive influences were actually kind of what's responsible. That we can talk about moral responsibility and causal responsibility from a philosophical point of view, and it gets complicated, and we end up saying, well, actually, we don't have libertarian free will, and it's because of the Big Bang. Yep, okay, I've written a book on that, etc., etc. But it's just worth remembering that some of these people were made to go to Ukraine to fight on behalf of Russia, that didn't want to do that. And the ones that did want to do that have been manipulated by the Kremlin and brainwashed by, years and years of state propaganda. So if we want to blame anyone here, if we really want to seek out blame, then it's it's the Kremlin and it's Russia and its insidious influence on its own population. We've talked about how they're insidiously trying to influence the European population and the American population in the way they vote. This is why I think we're in World War III. We are having wars in our heads. We're being invaded on a daily basis. If I sit there and listen to Elon Musk and David Sachs and Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter, I'm inviting the weapons of war, of information war, into my head of the Russian Federation. That war, my head is being invaded. So I put up my defenses to them and I fight back. Right. And this is the war we are involved in. We might not pick up a gun and go to the front lines in the Donbass. Right. That's not our remit, or that's not our job, or we don't have the ability. Some of us do. Some of us do go and volunteer to do that. And good on you. That's more than I can do. And that's braver than I am. Good on you. What I will do is what I can do right now, which is to fight on the information front line. We are at war. It's that simple to me. There's cyber attacks. We had a cyber attack in the UK on our hospitals recently. France has had attacks on their hospitals by the Russians. The US has had water treatment plants attacked and pipelines. You know, this is the war. Hybrid war takes place in many different sectors and domains. It's not just a tank against the tank. Anyway, I am banging on. Matthias Meyer, thank you for your important work, Mr. Pierce. Thank you, Matthias. It's an honor to speak to you guys. Paul Gilbert gifted 580p memberships. Paul, I think I'm going to see you on the June the 15th at the talk. I think you're coming, which is going to be brilliant. Michael, don't make me pronounce your surname, from Canada. Michael from Canada. JP, this is where the message is lost on Russia as a colonial power. Third world republics are a bigger problem than David Sachs. Yeah, they're all a problem. All of everything is a problem at the moment. We got to fight on all these different fronts. David Yakona. I never know, David. Is that an L? No, it's not an L because Capital would have that. So it is Yakona. I was right. All the best to you, my dear brother. He's my brother from another mother. Thanks, David. He's been here for the long haul. I really appreciate your support. And stop the carnage. As always, JP, you're a legend. Officially legend of the multiverse, if you don't mind me saying. We know that that's an official, fully kosher title. Anyway, that is probably enough from me. I'm fairly sure you have had enough of me banging on. There have no doubt been some absolutely fantastic questions, but because I'm just on my own, I have not been able to look through the comments to see what is a good comment and what isn't. Mitch, I've just seen Mitch is in there. Mitch Mazarol. If that's you, no, it's not. It's Mitch. It's the other Mitch, actually. Sorry. And there's Mitch Ashdown as well. So thank you for all of you Mitches for being in the live chat. And by the way, Pierre, I went to Ukraine and I hang out in the back of the battle bus with Pierre. Pierre's he's an absolutely awesome human being. And he puts his moral money where his mouth is, and he follows those words with actions. And he has been volunteering in Kramatorsk and in Ukraine, and he's going to go out and I think and deliver some vehicles to Ukraine as well on the way back there soon. Just absolutely great guy. And it's so wonderful that the world is full of people who are willing to do everything they can. And even if you are not willing to put your life on hold to do things like that, or not on hold, to enrich your life, then, you know, supporting the cause is really important. So thank you. Anyway, right. That is me done for today. I've been speaking to you long enough. I really appreciate all of you. I have done the mapping for today. I will produce a mapping update, but it'll probably come out much later tonight and maybe even after a glass of wine. I am going to go and get just the last thing I'm going to say to you. The other day, someone on one of my threads said, so I've got one of these 12-foot best weight pools out the back that the boys mess around in. And normally I get in there and it's really good for my exercise. So I hold on to the side. I'm not very mobile on my feet. So I do like loads of repetitions for my legs and then hook my legs over the side and then lots of repetitions for my arms. Someone said you can get a pool tether. and I bought myself a tether that goes around my waist, and I wrap it around a tree, and I can swim in this. The pool's only yay deep, right? It's not a pool; it's like an oversized paddling pool, but like I can tether myself, so I can. It's a bungee, elasticate bungee, and I can just swim on the spot. Freaking amazing! Yeah, so that's thank you for supporting me in my health efforts. Uh, oh my goodness, Mitch is there. Bloomin' hell! Wow, turns out I am here. Oh, Mitch, you're an absolute ledge, mate. Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate you. Mitch Mazerol, by the way, has a really interesting guy. I've talked about him before. Not Mitch. Well, Mitch is a really interesting guy, but he knows a guy who works in Canada, sort of helping put together big events and whatnot. And then every so often goes out to Ukraine and helps with Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, to get stuff done. And he was in the in occupied Mariupol sometime back, and the building collapsed as he was trying to trying to do some work in that building or something like that. And he's not a doctor, but he's helping things happen. But it was really interesting that MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, can actually get down to. So there must be corridors open to Mariupol. So that's the first thing. That there must be ways that you can get safely across the front lines. And B, that a building was hit. There was ostensibly a residential building. It was unsure whether it was a surface missile that was shot down onto that building, or whether it was targeted at that building. This happens obviously quite often on both sides. Just trying to work out. Anyway, the Ukrainians hit the building. There were Russian or pro-Russian. Well, no, there were just residents there. I don't know what their fealties were, but there were residents in that building that they were trying to save and whatnot, and it collapsed on him. And he's back in Canada with permanent, I think, damage to his hearing and everything. And talking about people that go to make the world a better place in very tangible ways. There's someone that says, every so often I'm going to go out to Ukraine and do that, which is absolutely incredible. But really interesting, like, information on how people like that can be working both in occupied territories and on the Ukrainian side as well. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. I really appreciate your support from everyone. It's brilliant. And I'll speak to you somewhat soon-ish. Toodle pips.